Intel versus AMD for content creation, photo, video, 3D, which CPU is the best? On this side, I have the Ryzen 9900x. On this side, I've got the Intel Core Ultra 265K. And you might be saying, you're a little bit late here. These CPUs came out like ages ago. You're absolutely right. But I retested them because there's massive improvements on the Core Ultra side. How does it now compare to AMD, the latest version, as well as the previous generation? Is it actually worth upgrading? Well, I'm glad you asked because you're gonna find out. Licensing Windows is cheap and easy with whokeys.com, and if you use the code TN20, you get an extra discount. Complete the purchase, copy the key, and paste it to the activation settings. And you're all done. Also check out their Microsoft Office 19 license and use the same code TN20 for the extra discount. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below. So if you're not familiar, what is the 265K? Since when do we have 3 numbers? We had 5 numbers in the previous generation, 14700K. What the heck is this? Well, basically this is the successor of 14700K. You can basically think of it as 15700K, except Intel started the naming again. This is Core Ultra series now. And this is the Ultra 7 265K. We've reviewed the 245K and the 285K. Now this is the middle guy. Bear in mind, I haven't retested the younger and older brother of this, the Core Ultra 5 and 9. So if you want to see that, stick around, hit that subscribe button, like button. They are your best friends. Bell icon as well, so you're not going to miss any of the notifications. By the way, if you remember, some of these videos might be already available for you. Check out the channel membership if you're interested. Now, I highly recommend checking out the 285K review because I'm going to go more in detail about some of the architectural changes and what's actually happened, because they have actually built the architecture from ground up. They have sacked one of the big things in there, which is multi-threading. There is 1 thread per core now, not 2 threads per core. As you can see from the specs here, the 265K has 20 cores and 20 threads. The 285K has 24 cores and 24 threads. So what you can see is we've got 4 cores less and 4 threads less. Now, we're boosting only to 5.5 gigahertz, so we've dropped 200 megahertz compared to the higher level. And we've also dropped a little bit of cache. As you can see, 6 megabytes shaved compared to the 285K. Apart from that, they look very, very similar. For example, the efficiency cores are actually boosting to 4.6 gigahertz on both 285K and 265K. Another interesting addition since the previous generation is that now we have extra 4 lanes of PCIe. Now we're both the same on Ryzen and on Intel, 24 lanes per chip, which is very, very cool. Let's talk about the testing setup for both of these, because I'm testing it slightly differently what you can see some of these gaming channels out there. For AMD Ryzen 9000 and 7000, I'm using the Asus X870E Pro at Creative Wi-Fi. We're using 64 gigabytes of Kingston Fury Beast RGB DDR5, and it's running at 5600 megatransfers for 9000 and 5200 megatransfers for 7000. More about that in a minute. For cooler, we're using a 360mm AIO from Asus ROG Strix. And for the SSDs, we're separating the operating and project drive. For the project drive, we're using Samsung 980 Pro SSDs. Moving on to Intel side, for the Intel previous generation, 14th gen, 13th gen, and previously, but in this case, 14th gen, we're using the ASRock Z790 Nova Wi-Fi motherboard. We're using 64 gigabytes of Kingston Fury Beast RGB DDR5. That's running at 5600 megatransfers per second. I'm using, again, a 360mm AIO, so there's no thermal difference. And for the operating and project drives, we're using the same SSDs as on the previous Samsung 980 Pro. Now, for the Core Ultra series, this new test bench that I'm testing, I'm actually using the Gigabyte Z890 Aero D motherboard. One of the best motherboards for creators. If you haven't seen the video yet, I highly recommend checking that one out. It's great fun if you're looking for the best motherboard for creators. It's probably that one on the Intel Core Ultra platform. Now it's running the latest BIOS and latest version, including the latest Windows. In there, we're also using 64 gigabytes of Kingston Fury Renegade, but now 6400 megatransfers per second and 360mm AIO, as well as the Samsung drives for the projects and operating system. All of the different platforms are running an RTX 4090. If you want to check out any of the Testbench setups, I'm going to leave the links in the description below if you want to dive deeper or actually pick any of these up, as well as our best bang for buck build guides. If you want to build yourself the best bang for buck create a PC, then check out them in the video description below. They're available now and they always lead to the latest video recommended and relevant to you, whatever time you're watching this. If you're watching this in 1 year's time from actually uploading this video, the link will still lead you to the latest video. Go check them out. So then, you might be already mad because saying you're bottlenecking some of these AMD CPUs or Intel CPUs. Why shouldn't you be using them faster RAM and so on? In order to actually showcase the different generations of CPUs also have a different IMC, integrated memory controller, I'm using the stock setting for the RAM. Now, if you didn't know that, both of these, Intel and AMD, want to give the reviewers a faster RAM to show that their CPU is running faster, even though this faster RAM is out of their spec, what they actually support. For example, the Core Ultra is running 6400 megatransfers per second. You have to use a CU DIMM to actually be fully 100% supported, but it's easily supported in any of the non-CU DIMM as well. For example, I'm using a non-CU DIMM. Compared to the previous generation, the 14th gen, the maximum RAM speed supported was 5600 megatransfers per second. Now for the AMD, the Ryzen 9000 is 5600 megatransfers per second from AMD's website. The Ryzen 7000 is 5200 megatransfers per second according to AMD. Now, yes, AMD will get more performance if you go with a faster RAM, but so does the previous generation and previous generations. Shall we just see which generation can run the fastest RAM? Well, in order to showcase that, I have to go with the stock settings in there. And for creators, that is one of the reasons why you might want to upgrade to the next generation as well. You get faster RAM speed, which means stable, faster performance. You could get the faster speed on the previous generation as well, but you might not be guaranteed those speeds. So that's the reason why we're testing it at these different speed settings. And that's why some of these gaming reviews are different. Now, first, let's talk about the power consumption. At full utilization in Cinebench R24, we're seeing that the 265K is pulling 210 watts, which is quite a bit less than the previous generation, which is 253 watts. Bear in mind, I'm testing them at the stock Intel settings as well. There's no overclocking for the CPUs on Intel platform. It's just the maximum Intel stock setting possible. And the same for AMD. I'm not enabling PBO or any of the other things. It's just stock, what it comes from the factory, what, is allowable within the warranty specs, if that makes sense. Now, the 9900X is pulling only 162 watts. That is very, very low. The 14700K and the 7900X is pulling 200 watts. As you can see, the 9900X is pulling less watts than on the previous generation, which is good. I like it going down, and that's the same direction Intel is going with theirs. Now, yes, with PBO enabled, you can get more performance, but that's what I'm seeing right now. So looking at Cinebench R24, we can see that the 9900X is actually about 5% slower in the single core score and 14.9% slower in the multi-core score. 14700K is about 10% slower in the single core score and roughly about 11% slower in the multi-core score. So let's say roughly about 10% slower in the multi and single core score. 10% increase between generations, it's okay, but nothing upgrade worthy yet. And bear in mind, these are CPU synthetic benchmarks. If we go with more mixed workflow, let's see how this is going to make a difference. The 7900X is roughly about 15% slower in the single core score, but about 22% slower in the multi-core score. Moving on to Geekbench 6, we're seeing roughly about the same results. The 9900X is actually faster in single core score, 3.6% faster, and the multi-core score is about 10% slower. So not that big of a difference compared to the Cinebench R24. 14700K is about 9% slower in the single and multi-core scores compared to the Core Ultra 7. And the 7900X is only 6% here slower in the single core score and about 16-17% slower in the multi-core score. Geekbench 6 iGPU. This is one of the interesting things that maybe is interesting to you. A bit of random fact, rabbit hole, let's talk about it. The iGPU compared to the previous generation has got more than double the performance. We're talking about 2.5 times the performance. 14700K is 60% slower in the OpenCL scores and about 55% slower in the Vulkan scores. The 9950X here, I haven't tested it on the 9900X, but it's basically the same iGPU. the CPU doesn't really matter here, but just to show the iGPU difference, is about 70% slower and 62% slower. That's a huge improvement on the iGPU for the Core Ultra 7, but why do you need such a good iGPU in there? I would rather have CPU cores than iGPU cores. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Now, moving on to photo editing and Adobe Photoshop. Firstly, here we can see that the 9900X is about 8% faster in the overall score. AMD is slaying here Intel. 13.6% faster in the filter score. That's amazing. If you do in Photoshop, as you can see, the 9900X is just working amazingly. 14700K is about 3% slower. So we're only gaining a couple of percent going with the Core Ultra compared to the previous generation. Doesn't look that good for Intel. The 7900X is only 3% slower compared to the Core Ultra 7. That's like 2 generations ago, and AMD is still holding its performance. That's ridiculous. Moving on to Adobe Lightroom Classic, and the 9900X here is interestingly a lot slower. Now in Lightroom Classic, the Core Ultra series, now with the new testing, seems to have the biggest upgrade in terms of performance. It is actually really fast and one of the fastest CPUs I have ever tested. So I don't know what they've done in terms of the update or whatever, but in Lightroom Classic, the new Core Ultra series CPUs are one of the best you can get, which is kind of amazing. Looking at the Ryzen 9 9900X, it's 22% slower. That's absolutely ridiculous. And the 14700K, when retesting again, is quite a bit faster than AMD Ryzen, but about 10% slower compared to the Core Ultra series. The 7900X is 27% slower. So between the Ryzen different generations in Lightroom Classic, there's not that big of a difference, but the Intel chips are a lot faster. So interestingly, Adobe Photoshop, Ryzen is a lot better. In Lightroom Classic, the Intel seems to be a lot better. As you can see that the 14700K is also quite a bit faster compared to the 9900X. Bear in mind, this is not a single test that I've done. I've done at least 5 tests and then calculated the average of this. Let's move on to video editing. And here, the 9900X is about 12 to 17% slower in the extended and standard overall scores. That's quite a reasonable increase in the Core Ultra 7 there. And the 14700K is only 7 to 8% roughly slower in the overall scores compared to the Core Ultra. Now, interestingly, even though the new iGPU, we're not seeing a massive increase in the long GOP scores or anything else. There's no new codec support, nothing else. There's only a couple of percent difference. So in the Intel's own ecosystem of 14700K to Core Ultra 7, not that big of a difference. Between the AMD and Intel, quite a big difference. The 7900X is about 16 to 19% slower in the overall scores. Now, but the one thing here to kind of mention is that I'm testing it with the 4090, RTX 4090, right? If you go with a new generation of GPUs, RTX 5000, then there is new codec support, especially in the H.264 and 5 codecs, 10-bit photo 2, which makes Intel QuickSync irrelevant, and the performance increase between AMD and Intel might not be as big. At the moment, when I'm making this video, we still don't have the support for the Adobe software, Premiere Pro especially, for the 5000 series, so I can't show you this yet. If you want to see that, hit that subscribe button so you're not going to miss that video when it comes out. Now, moving on to After Effects, the 9900X is only 3% slower here. 14700K is about 5.3% slower, and the 7900X about 11% slower. In After Effects here, looks like Intel's doing quite okay, but at the same time, 9900X is not that much slower. 3% overall, you're not going to notice the difference. These CPUs perform roughly the same. If you want better performance for your After Effects workflow, just get more RAM, because you can use the RAM preview and you have more capacity to store all your previews on the RAM. That will be a better option for you. In DaVinci Resolve here, we can see that the 9900X is about 10% slower in the overall basic score, but that is the free version of DaVinci Resolve. If we go with the standard overall or extended overall score, you can see that the difference is only 3.7% or 5.5% for 9900X. Not that big of a difference. Interestingly, again, even with the latest driver, we have some kind of long GOP issue here. The 9900X is 31% faster in long GOP scores, so that's H.264 and 5, so the iGPU and the Intel QuickSync isn't quite working here in DaVinci Resolve. As you can see, even the 14700K has faster long GOP score than the Core Ultra. So either the DaVinci Resolve that I'm using doesn't support the new iGPU, or the driver that I have for that doesn't support that, which is weird. The 14700K is actually 3% faster in the standard overall scores and about the same in extended overall scores. Now, it could be because of the long GOP issue. The long GOP is about 43% faster on the 14700K compared to the Core Ultra 7. So I'm not sure what's going on in here. I'm getting a little bit of a weird thing. This was the same when I did the earlier testing a couple of months ago when the CPUs actually came out. I saw the same thing in DaVinci Resolve. Maybe it's because I'm using not the latest version of DaVinci Resolve. It could be just that the support of DaVinci Resolve is not there. If everything worked roughly about the same, I would expect similar results as in Premiere Pro. I don't know where the issue here is. Moving on to 3D rendering, and in Blender we can see that the 9900X is about 5% slower in the monster scene, which is interesting. The 9900X actually has more threads compared to the Core Ultra 7, but the multi-core performance on the Core Ultra 7 is interestingly quite impressive. Although the junction scene is 2% faster on the 9900X and 2.5% faster in the classroom scenes. So in 3D, AMD seems to have a little bit of a lead. Compared to the 14700K, we're about 3 to 7.5% slower on the 14700K, so not even a 10% increase on the Core Ultra 7. 7900X is about 7 to 10% slower compared to Core Ultra 7. So the Core Ultra 7 isn't that impressive in terms of 3D rendering. And as you can see, the 9900X hasn't increased that much compared to the 7900X either. Moving on to V-Ray, the 9900X is about 1.5% faster than the Core Ultra 7. That's basically the same performance on both of them. The 14700K is about 7.5% slower. 7900X about 10 to 11% slower. Now, in 3D, you can see that there's not that big of a difference between these CPUs. The 9900X seems to be a better pick here because it pulls less power, yet gets a little bit better scores compared to the Core Ultra 7 265K. So what about the conclusion? Should you buy the 9900X or the Core Ultra 7 265K? If you want to pick them up, the links are in the description below. For content creators, honestly, there's not that big of a difference between Intel or AMD. We have to look a little bit deeper in terms of the latest features. Does the Intel Core Ultra 7 provide you something better than the 9900X doesn't give you? Well, in video editing, you have the Intel QuickSync, so H.264 and 5 422 10-bit will be better played back on the Intel side compared to the AMD. If you use NVIDIA RTX 5000 series, then that feature isn't that much better on the Intel than on AMD because the RTX 5000 is better than both of them. So that puts us in a very interesting position where neither of these CPUs don't seem to be better over the other one. Now, I can see why people would like to have the Ryzen CPU because you have better support and upgradability. And Intel stability issues on the previous generation, people are still mad. What's going on in there? But, you know, the BIOS updates actually fix that. So in case you're wondering, is there an issue? If you buy a new one, just update the BIOS, it'll be fine. But the Ryzen one will have a better upgrade support or updates available in the future. And for that reason, going with AMD seems to be the better option. But there's a few more things to consider. For example, if you're a creator and you need Thunderbolt support, AMD only offers USB 4. There's no Thunderbolt on AMD. Thunderbolt is only available on Intel side. If that's important to you, you might want to go with this one. If you just need USB 4 for your devices, AMD is the better option for you. In terms of pricing, the Ryzen 9000 also seems to be a little bit cheaper than the Core Ultra series for now, which is a little bit odd because it's not that much better, so going with AMD seems to be a better option. The actual dark horse over here is the previous generation. As you can see, the latest generation of Ryzen 9900X or the Core Ultra 7 265K, there isn't that big of a difference. And going with the previous generation seems to be a lot better bang for buck option because you're paying a lot less for it. Go check out the 14700K pricing or the 7900X pricing. They're a lot cheaper, yet the performance is right up there. in some of the cases, the 4700K was keeping up with the Core Ultra 7, which is impressive. But if you want to go with the AMD platform, pick up the 7900X. I'm going to leave both of these linked in the video description below if you want to check them out. So to me, going with the latest generation right now, because it doesn't give you necessarily any new features, might not be the best idea for you. You might not need it. Save some money, go with the previous generation. There is one more thing why you might want to go with the latest generation, which is PCIe Gen 5 storage. If that is important to you, going with the new Core Ultra 7 seems to be a better option because you've got more PCIe lanes directly to the CPU. But it's the same case with AMD. Now, did you expect these types of results or not? Let me know in the comment section below. I would love to know what you think. Thanks guys for watching. If you want to check out any of the parts I'm talking about the links are in the description below. For members, there's more videos already available if you want to, if you're desperate to watch some videos. Bear in mind, all of the videos will be available for everybody because I want to make sure that everyone can watch these. You don't have to pay. If you want to get them early, the members can get them early. Thanks guys for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.